There's plenty of literature about it if you want to know more. And there's China right now, where the same principle still applies. More so these days after Xi Jinping tightened screws back on some areas of power which the Chinese Communist Party had let loose some decades ago. The point about Leninism is that after absolute power is achieved, the leftist ratchet stops. The country stops moving left. No new ideas. No new catering to low-status people and using them to topple the government. No, none of that. The ever-advancing leftist movement was just a means to an end. The end was power. Once power is achieved, leftism dissolves. It doesn't disappear, it leaves some residue, in that states always try to have ideological consistency with what they said during their founding. Chinese dynasties frame that as filial piety of emperors, following the ideas of Grandpa the Founder. But it's mostly just inertia. This is not how things turned out in Western Europe and North America. No leftist party, as such, ever achieved absolute power in the West. It just didn't happen, and not for lack of trying, but it didn't pan out. As for why, well, there's my theory back then. Countries which developed capitalism slowly tended to produce less resentful losers than agrarian empires who were thrown suddenly into modernity. That's not quite my original theory. I've read it somewhere else, maybe someone can remind me who first said it. At any rate, the success of Leninism in Russia and China has plenty of chance in it. Lenin could very easily not have taken power. He could have lost the Civil War. He could have not had that precious Wall Street Jewish money to keep him afloat. No Soviet Russia, no Communist China either. But anyway, it did happen, and socialism was very strong in those places with or without actual takeover. So what happened in the West anyway? There's one guy who thought about it very deeply, for a long, long time. Mostly because he was in jail, so he had plenty of time to study the problem. I'm talking about Antonio Gramsci. He was a communist agitator in Italy who got caught by Mussolini and was sentenced to rot in prison. During that time, he thought a very reasonable problem. Why am I here? Why did I lose? Fucking Lenin did a coup d'etat and he won, now he has power. Now look at me, rotting in prison. What went wrong? His idea, which was hugely influential, and for good reason, was that the power structure wanted to keep being the power structure, and you couldn't just throw it away and replace it with your boys. You can try your chance in electoral politics, but there's only so many resentful fucks who are willing to vote for the abolition of the very foundation of social life, property, at least in moderately prosperous Western countries. In these kind of places, if you want to take absolute power, you have to colonize the power structure very slowly. You have to influence their minds. You have to change the culture. This sounds very esoteric and spiritual, but it's not. Basically, Gramsci argues that you gotta grab the press and education system, and slowly but steadily do in every institution with some power what you do in a political party. Political parties work by hiring loyal people, by preying on their low status. Well, find a way into HR of every school, every newspaper, every government department, every judicial board, and to the very same thing. Run a distributed covert Leninist party until you run everything. Sounds easy, huh? No, it sounds complicated like hell, and it was, but not so much. After all, there's fairly obvious economies of scale to influence peddling. A guy knows a guy who knows a guy. The great discovery of the 20th century wasn't atomic power, it was the power of cliques. A few people in positions of power sticking with each other is the most powerful force in the universe. They can make lies become truth, they can make toilets be sold as art, they can make women be combat soldiers. They can do anything. It was quite easy for socialists to get their hand in the media. After all, journalists are all natural socialists. Smart-ish guys good at writing with no talent for making money. And the same goes for teachers. Teaching doesn't pay very well. And it's exhausting. Why would anyone want to be a teacher? Well, for the greater glory of socialism, that is. So once socialists colonized the education system, the Gramscian distributed Leninist party got most of the job done. After all, the schools are exactly where all the different power centers intersect. Montesquieu must have thought himself very smart saying that legislators, bureaucrats, and judges should be independent and in constant conflict. Well, yeah, but where do they send their kids to school? To the very same places. And pray tell, cher Marquis, how do you plan on having those judges and bureaucrats and legislators and teachers and journalists and bankers and industrialists who have all grown up together, shared a secluded life as a unified ruling class, how the hell are you going to make them check and balance each other? That can't work. And it isn't working. They marry each other and send their kids to the same schools. Yeah, they'll do some show and play politics theater, or kabuki as the American like to say for some reason, as if only kabuki was fake and other theaters were real. But in the end, they are an endogamic ruling class and they know it. Gramsci's program was also called The Long March into the Institutions, a slow but steady cultural revolution. It was complete in most Western countries by the 1960s, and then we know what happened. I guess Gramsci's original plan was to then grab power in a classical Leninist way, a dictatorship of the proletariat of a sort, but that ship had sailed in Western Europe. The workers were rich. They could afford cars and houses and vacations to Florida or Spain. You couldn't motivate them with calls for hanging the capitalists and redistributing their property among the masses. So the party was up and running. By the 1960s, socialist cliques, more or less loosely associated with formal socialist parties, were running most schools and most newspapers, and most government agencies, and most courthouses, and most parliaments. But you had to keep them together, keep them loyal and obedient. The classical way was to get the losers of capitalism, i.e. workers, and bureaucrat-inclined people, and promise them high status come the revolution. That had worked pretty well from 1848 to 1948. Hell, they conquered half the world, and were really close to capturing power in much of the West, too. But by 1960 in the West, they needed a new ideology to get people motivated and loyal. So again, what they did was stick to the structure, promise high status to low status people, but change the content, adapt to the times. Western 1960 society was very much not 1860 society. It was much richer, much more equal, and much more pleasant. People worked 8 hours a day, they had cars and TVs, girls put out pretty easily, and there was always a party to go to. Absolutely no point in running a communist revolution. Well, there was the 1968 revolution, with the anti-Vietnam stuff and all that, but that was just a big-ass outdoor party, not a real revolution. It just sounded cool to call it that. The teens from 1968 are now all in positions of power, and they haven't abolished private property. But again, the leftist ratchet isn't a particular set of people. It's a memeplex with a life of its own, a virus evolved to concentrate power, adopting ideas that help in the project and discarding those that not. Economic socialism, organizing the poor, wasn't working out in the West anymore, but the principle is sound. They just needed to find whoever was low status then, and there is always someone status is zero-sum. There is always someone on top, someone on the bottom. Even in egalitarian societies, socialism had really pressured Western society into becoming a quite egalitarian and pleasant society by 1960. But even in the best of worlds, there's always low-status people. Even if you re-engineer society so that there's complete equality of opportunity, even if you run a revolution and you dissolve every existing hierarchy and start anew, there will always be low-status people. Because there's always biology. Some people are tall, some people are short. Some look good, some are pretty ugly. Some are thin and some are fat. Some are pleasant, some are annoying. Some are cool and some are awkward. Some are smart and some are dumb. Some make good choices, some make bad choices. Some are law-abiding, and some are criminally inclined. The latter of each pair is going to be low status anywhere on Earth, even in Soviet communism under Commander Trotsky. Some people just suck. That's the way genes work. And so thankfully, for leftism, even after achieving affluence, even after the working class disappeared as a thing, there was still plenty of material to work with to advance the cause of complete control. And so leftist groups started agitating status for people of African descent, for Jews, for single women, for drug junkies, for sluts, for fat people, for homos, for lesbians, for aggressive Muslims, for the disabled, for the retarded, for the mentally insane, for the trannies, all people who were low status in Western society, and who would be low status in any society, because they suck. They just aren't very productive, for no fault of their own. Some people are born tall, some short. Some smart, some dumb. Some empathetic, some psychopathic. Some content with their lot, some greedy with power lust. That's how it is. And so the long march through the institutions that Gramsci first envisioned as a way of having the Italian Communist Party do what Lenin had done ended up producing a different kind of Leninist system, one distributed and informal instead of Lenin's unified and formal, and one which morphed into promotion of the dregs of society, quadregs of society, instead of promotion of Marx's idea of the wrongly oppressed proletariat. Marx was not a good man, but at least he tried to dress his ideas in a way that made sense. Das Kapital took some real work to write, but that was just some contingent accident of his time. Leftism doesn't need to make sense, it just needs to get the job done. Or at least marginally, because the very fact that we have biological Leninism as the organizing principle of all centers of power in the West, and that it keeps getting worse all the time, is because it's not quite getting the job done. The job is concentration of power. It's achieving absolute control. What Lenin did. What once Lenin did that, or more precisely Stalin did that, the ideological content of the left stabilized. Cthulhu stopped swimming left. But here in the Atlantic, Cthulhu has been swimming for centuries, getting crazier every day, because there's no one to stop him. We have a cathedral, yes, an informal distributed Leninist party, ensuring very efficiently that only their people get in positions of power and influence. But there is no Stalin, no Xi Jinping, not even a lousy Putin even. As for why is a good question. The unwritten constitution of English politics is just very robust. English liberty. Only Oliver Cromwell ever tamed that beast, and not for very long, and that was quite a while ago. The West is the U.S. vassal empire, and the U.S. just doesn't do absolutism very well. But it'll get there, it's getting close. The returns are just too great. If there's a way to grab power, somebody will grab it. All he, or more likely she at this rate, has to do is say, "Give me power, or else all of you, all those evil fat women with a make-work office job, all those foreigners living off the public purse, all those just plain unpleasant people with unhealthy lifestyles. All of you give me power, or if you don't, we'll go back to 1959. It'll be okay to be white, and all of you will have to make your bed, clean up your room, and do actual work. You'll be on your own." How long will it take? Can't be that much longer.